Welcome, everyone. It is so good to see you all today. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Excelsior University, the Center for Social Justice, and the Parenting and Men's Robe teams are thrilled to be hosting Brian Anderson, the author of the book Fathering Together, Living a Connected Dad Life, and the co-founder and board president of the Fathering Together nonprofit organization. Now, thank you for joining us, Brian. We're really honored to have you. And before I introduce you formally, though, I have the privilege of passing the microphone to Dr. David Scable, president of Excelsior University, who has kindly offered to share a few words about Fathering Together. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Daniel, and welcome, Brian. So Fathering Together is a nonprofit organization focused on reimagining fatherhood through panels, support groups, and daily efforts to change the narratives about fatherhood. Fathering Together helps fathers be more physically present and emotionally courageous, with an emphasis on making the world a more equitable and connected place. Research demonstrates that children have higher self-esteem and form stronger relationships when fathers engage, that children with emotionally connected dads have fewer behavioral and psychological problems, and that dads tend to be healthier, happier, and more secure in their work life when they're present at home with their children. With this information in mind, Fathering Together began as a Facebook group called Dads with Daughters, with 50 dads connecting over their shared experiences. Within a year, they had connected with 10,000 members, and within 2 years, more than 120,000 dads from across the globe were sharing stories, seeking advice, and offering wisdom. Today, Fathering Together offers a premier community called the Fatherhood Insider, designed to empower fathers to be agents of positive change and to gain skills to deepen their relationships with their partners, children, and friends. The biggest challenge many fathers face is emotionally connecting and communicating their feelings to those they love most. The Fatherhood Insider offers weekly discussions, online courses, and local chapter affiliates to support and help fathers become more accountable and available. Now, if you could see my sweatshirt today, you'd see that I'm channeling UConn, my alma mater, in preparation for the Final Four women's and men's games this weekend. And I was struck a few weeks ago by news stories about how the famous University of Iowa star Caitlin Clark has created a buzz with dads and daughters and created opportunities for connection between fathers and their daughters. And there's no question that both parents are extremely important to the kids flourishing, and mothers and fathers play different roles in that process. And so today we're focusing on the role of dads in the well-being of their children. So thank you for what will undoubtedly be a great presentation. Thank you, Daniel. Back to you.
Thank you, David. And also, before I introduce you, Brian, I would like to thank a number of people and units that have made today's event possible, starting with Linda and Nyla from marketing, Jason and Connor from communications, Mike, Kim, Sharon, and Jill regarding our procurement process, of course, David and Pam from the Center for Social Justice. Thank you so much for your amazing support and partnership. So, and now I have the honor of introducing Brian Anderson. So good to see you again, Brian. Brian Anderson is a husband, father, and gender equity advocate. In his professional life, he is a director of foundation relations for IC Stars, an organization that works with community members who have overcome adversity and developed resilience, and who have passion for technology, problem-solving skills, and motivation to help others. Based on strategic partnerships and corporate sponsors, program participants are supported in their engagement in internships through which they gain on-the-job experience, develop the professional network needed to jumpstart their careers, learn by doing, and build web-based applications to solve client challenges. Brian's side hustles and projects include being the co-founder and board president of Fathering Together, where he writes and speaks on the importance of dads living connected lives. He has worked with dozens of companies and hundreds of dads to translate their professional skills into home life strategies. In his personal life, you can find him building Lego structures, cooking, and writing stories with his two daughters. In September 2022, he published his first book, Fathering Together, Living a Connected Life, which lays out servant leadership as a model for fatherhood. The title of Brian's presentation today is Living a Connected Life. He will lay out 4 areas that are essential for dads to build a foundation for living a connected dad life. These 4 areas are grounded in research, personal anecdotes from hundreds of interviews Brian conducted for his book, and words of wisdom passed down from father figures. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your passion, work, and insight with us today. Welcome to Excelsior University, and the floor is yours. Everyone, think of questions, comments you might want to have toward the end, as we'll engage in dialogue.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I'll just share my screen. And thank you, Daniel. Yes, I grew up in Indiana, so I am a Purdue fan at heart, and went to Butler. So I have some dogs in the fight for this NCAA tournament, but we'll just see what happens this weekend. We'll just leave it at that. So let's get started. First, thank you again so much for having me and to talk with you all. And I love what you all are doing with the ropes teams and other things that I've talked with Daniel. And so I'll kind of weave some of that in to my keynote here, and excited to talk more when I'm done with the formal presentation piece. But as you see here before you, this is Notre Dame. It's a very famous cathedral. And there's a parable that kind of goes along with these epic construction sites. And it comes from Christopher Wren, who is the architect behind the St. Paul Cathedral in London. And he showed up one day to the site and saw his bricklayers working and constructing the building. And he asked one of them, what are you doing here today? And he said, well, I'm working with these bricks. This is my job. I want to feed my family. And another said, well, I'm working on the wall here to create a strong structure for the ceiling so it doesn't fall in on the parishioners. And he turned to the third one, who was proud and beaming and looking up to the heights. And he said, for me, I'm building a cathedral. I'm excited to be a part of this immense project. And I first heard this parable many years ago, and in the context of interfaith dialogue work, when I was working with some college students, and a mentor friend of mine was sharing this in a talk. And soon after I became a dad, but the parable kind of stuck with me. And I started asking myself, like, what am I in this scenario? Like, which kind of bricklayer am I? Am I the one that just lays the bricks and thinks about just the task at hand? Or do I see the bigger picture? Do I see the cathedral that is being built around me? And as a dad, I started kind of framing it in the context of my children. Do I see my children as something that will live far beyond me? Like a cathedral lives far beyond Christopher Wren and all of the architects of that era. They rarely saw the construction to completion because of their, the epic time it took to build these things. And for me, my children, knock on wood, will live far beyond me. And I need to have that scale in mind, though, right? How am I building a cathedral out of my children, not just going day to day with the tasks? Now, ultimately, you kind of have to be both, or in this case, you need to have all 3 mindsets from the parable, from that at the task at hand to the larger vision. And by living a connected dad life, you'll get there, right? Like, as I really started doing the research, as I've worked with men, as Daniel was saying, I've interviewed lots of different dads from all over the globe. This framework started coming out of the stories I would hear from dads, and servant leadership was at the core of this. And for those unfamiliar with servant leadership, this was a theory that was coined by a man named Robert Greenleaf back in the 1960s. He was a CEO of a Fortune 500 company that really wanted to pave a new way of thinking for himself and his business, because for him, he's has to respond to the shareholders and the board to say, how are we making profits? And he could have been authoritarian in his mindset and said, well, I lay down the law. I force everybody to work 9 to 5 or even more to get to the bottom line that is the most profitable. But instead, he was reading some books and kind of taking a more philosophical approach, and realized if I serve my staff and my employees, if I create opportunities for my employees to grow and develop professionally, they'll enjoy working, they'll enjoy being in part of this culture that we've cultivated at this company, and they'll work better and faster, and that will get us a profit that everyone will be happy with. And he laid out like 10 or 16, depending on which research you look at or which discussion you have about servant leadership. And I'll be honest, as a parent, and many of you who are listening, you're probably parents, none of us have time to remember 10 or 16 tasks. I definitely struggle to remember my kids' names and will get them confused half the time, much to their annoyance. So to come up with a theory with 16 parts would take far too long and would really be far too boring for today. And so I kind of, there's 4 kind of overarching parts, but there's 5 steps that I want to lay out in this task. And in my book, it's kind of broken into 4 areas, but I just want us today to focus on the 5 steps that will drive towards being a connected dad, but really a connected parent. I work primarily with dads and fathers, but I know there's plenty of moms and maybe some aunts and uncles or people that don't have biological children, but see themselves as a father figure on this call or maybe listening later. And so while I will use the language of father and dad, please know that these are definitely applicable to any who might be listening that are seeing themselves as a parenting role. And so we'll lay out those steps, and I'm happy to hear back with any questions or drill down in anything I may gloss over for those that are listening today. And so the first and foremost is to recognize that we're not going to be perfect, right? UConn has some great female traditions. They've got an amazing team, but they don't always have perfect records. Purdue definitely has not had perfect records from time to time. When I was growing up, I remember my dad getting angry all the time at the basketball team. And as a dad, I'm definitely not going to be perfect. And my kids know this. And I want to impose on all of us that when we recognize that we're not going to be perfect, 2 things really come out of that. One is we take the stress off of us from being perfect, right? Our kids are going to see us when we're not perfect. They're going to recognize we're not perfect. Even if we think we're perfect, they're going to tell us we're not perfect because we didn't show up 5 minutes early, or we came 5 minutes late, or any number of reasons our kids will define imperfections in our lives. But also by recognizing our imperfections, we will give our children an out. They will have an invitation to be imperfect as well. Plenty of research points to the stress that gets put on us, but also our children as they develop when they think they have to be perfect. And so how do we live through those imperfections? How do we embrace them and work through them? Because as a friend of mine told me once, failing does not mean you're a failure. It just means you're learning where your skills aren't the best, and you can hone those and get better at those with time. And here in this photo, you can see that we were not perfect in painting my daughter's bedroom. At the time, they were 5 and 9-ish, and I wanted to be a great dad and have them feel invested and help us, paint this room. And of course, one of my daughters decides to take the roller without me looking and starts going to town and starts, to drop it. And I reach out and I grab it, thus getting paint all over me. She looks like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then I start laughing. So she starts laughing, and then I smeared some paint on her nose. Let's make some fun out of this, right? Like, we're frustrated. This is taking forever to paint, but let's have fun. Let's make a game out of this. And we may have wasted a little bit of paint. There may still be some paint on the hardwood floor, but we still had fun. We embraced those imperfections, and we allowed an escape from that kind of rigid structure of I have to get straight A's. I have to get the perfect job. I have to be this perfect something. Otherwise, my parents won't love me. And if that becomes a narrative in your household, then you're doomed for failure, right? Because that's not something that's going to end well for anybody. The second step is to be present. I wasn't all that present when I didn't see my daughter start to drop the roller right away, but I've tried to be present in other ways, right? And at the core of being present is communication, but not always with words, right? How are we being present with our body language, with our attention? How are we remembering the imperfections, the little tics that our kids demonstrate when they are starting to wind up for an epic fight or a meltdown? How are we communicating that? By being present. So one story that I love to share about this is from a guy that I interviewed for my book. His name's Andy. And as a kid growing up, every time he would come home his dad would always ask him, like, what did you learn today? What did you achieve? And I ask my kids this all the time too. There's nothing wrong with asking our kids that. But when he didn't have an answer, when Andy wasn't sure what he achieved that day, he saw his dad like turn off. His dad like disconnected. And so from Andy's perspective, he learned I have to achieve, I have to perform, and I have to do everything right for my dad to love me. And again, that's not a message that we want to impart on our children, right? Our children should know we love them no matter what. We may not like them all the time, but they need to know we love them all the time. And so as he got older, he had this mindset that he always had to achieve. So when his kids got born, he had to really think critically for himself. How am I going to change this narrative? How am I going to work through this for the sake of my children and myself? And it came to a head one night. His daughter had been sick. They'd gone to the doctor. They've gotten medications, all the things that you're supposed to do. And for all of us that have kids, sometimes when our kids are really congested, lying flat on their back or their stomach is hard to fall asleep, right? Like all of that pressure rushes to their brain. And so for him, he ended up sleeping or trying to sleep in a chair with his daughter on his chest all night long so that she could breathe, relieve that pressure. And he remembers just hating getting through that night because he couldn't do anything. There was nothing he could do except hold his daughter and be present to her. But it was an eye-opener for him. It made him realize like all of those lessons that he had learned from his dad were not the right lessons. And so he started changing the schema for himself. He stopped asking his kids about what they achieved and instead just noticed what they loved doing and joined in the fun. If their kids loved playing with bricks, then he played with bricks that night. If they wanted to help him cook dinner, then they helped make dinner, no matter how many eggs got broken. And when you have the ability to do that, when you get on their level, when you see them eye to eye and recognize that the world looks really scary when you're 1.5 feet tall, but when someone looks at you eye to eye, they're showing you respect, then you start to gain that strength as a little kid and confidence as a little kid that your parents are there for you, right? They're not just protecting you, but they're there for you. They want to know who you are. And so being present is so critical. Along with that is emotional courageousness. This is something that I have to give credit to my friends Jim Young and John Badalaments. Through the research and workshops we were doing early on with Fathering Together, we talk about as men that we need to be strong. We need to be there for our children, for our families. And some dads, that means being physically present, right? Bulking up, being strong and accountable and holding the door, holding up the weight of the family. But sadly, I don't know about all the men that are listening on this call right now, but I know I got taught that I had to be strong and separate my strength from my emotion. And ultimately, I only got 3 emotions, right? I only got to be glad, sad, and mad. I could maybe cry if I won a football game or achieve something really great, or maybe at a funeral or a birthday or my child's birth. But in general, I wasn't really allowed to have those emotions. I could joke and be silly. I could be angry, definitely be angry, but I didn't have the messaging to say I get to use all of my emotions. And that's not good, right? To say the least. And 3 things start to arise when you are not emotionally courageous. One is you aren't fully human. You're not fully engaging in your family, so you can't be present. You're definitely going to show those imperfections a lot more. Second is your kids aren't going to learn to have that language, right? They're not going to learn the difference between happy and joy, or anger and irate, or frustration and like irritability. But those are all distinct emotions. Those are all distinct words that we have at our disposal to talk about the breadth of who we can be as humans and as people. And if we don't do that, again, we're doing a disservice. We're losing language. We're losing the ability to connect. And so the third thing that starts to happen is that you're no longer authentic with your children. You're putting up a barrier between you and them, and they're not able to see you as a full human. They're not able to see you as someone that they can connect with. So how do you show your strength through emotion? How do you teach your children that it's okay to cry, that it's a natural thing to cry, that it's natural also to be angry, not aggressive and violent, right? We don't want to be violent, but we can be angry. We can be frustrated that there's traffic. We can be frustrated that we got a poor grade on a test. But how do we express that through our words? How do we be present with our children to talk through that? And I gave a talk a few years ago to a group of at-home dads. It's a national organization. If there's any primary caregivers here who are dads that see themselves as an at-home parent, it's a great organization. Happy to connect you with them. But I gave a talk on how to have a gender equitable home, how to share the workload with your partner so that you can, have that flexibility in your day. And I kind of went in with the assumption that they kind of already knew some of these things, that they were already kind of balancing some workload. But it turns out that they weren't, A. And B, we ended up talking about anger management the whole time, because some of the dads were sharing that when things don't go their way in the home, when they get frustrated, they just escalate and Hulk out, right? They become the Incredible Hulk, and they don't turn green or anything, but they get angry like the Hulk, and they let that anger out in unproductive ways. So we started talking through, what does it mean then to be emotionally courageous? How to show that strength to your children, to recognize that, especially in our age now where men are taught not to be emotionally courageous, that it takes a lot more courage to show those emotions. And so to be connected with our kids, you've got to show those too. The fourth one is kind of a big one, and that is, how do we accept our children? How do we accept them when we might have this imagined future for them? And I don't know about all of you, but when I found out I was going to be a dad, of course I started thinking like, oh, my kids are going to be great. They're going to be Olympians and college professors and maybe even the president of a company someday. They're going to be parents and good at sports and maybe virtuoso at some musical instrument. And of course, all of that at the same time, because, I let my dreams run wild. But again, that's not healthy, right? I don't want to put that pressure on them. I don't want to put that pressure on myself to raise somebody that's good. And who knows, right? They could have been born with any number of limitations. But two things to recognize here. Our children, no matter how they're born, that's their reality, right? If they are born with a quote unquote limitation, they don't see it as a limitation. It's just who they are. They're going to love who they love. They're going to be who they be. They're going to find a destination for their gifts and talents. And for us as parents and for us as dads, it's to accept them for those gifts and talents. And it's to accept them for who they are and not who we want them to be. Because when we think through who we want them to be, when we start to parent and think, oh, my kid's going to be like this kind of person at age 18, then we're not parenting them at age 5, at age 3. We're forgetting that we need to be present to them at those ages just as much as we might have a guiding plan to get there by 18. But if we're not thinking about them in that moment, laying the developmental grounding foundational steps for them to get there, then they're gonna get frustrated. They're gonna think they're imperfect. They're gonna be like Andy and think, I've got to be perfect. I've got to perform for my parents, rather than be who they want to be. And for us as parents, figuring out ways to guide them and nurture those gifts and talents that they naturally come by, rather than forcing in skills that they may not want. My oldest daughter, she is very studious, grade A student kind of person, more of a jump feet first, or maybe put the toe in first before they dive into something. Whereas my youngest, she will dive head first without asking any questions. When she was 3, she was in her gymnastics class with me. They got to run down this, like trampoline runway into a ball pit. My 7-year-old, or sorry, she was 3 at the time. She was called up second. The first kid had run to the end, stopped, and just jumped down and then helped out. And then the coach says, okay, Natalie, your turn. And Natalie goes full board down, doesn't hesitate, jumps headfirst into the ball pit. And all the parents look at me like I've raised this wild, crazy child. And I just kind of shrug my shoulders. I'm like, that's my daughter. She cannot be edited. She will be who she wants to be. She already has plans of being the next Taylor Swift. And who am I to stop her, right? So how do I help her temper some of the expectations? Because her vocal quality is not quite what Taylor Swift's is. But also, how do I help her live into that enthusiasm? But also, how do I guide my more timid child to be a little bit more adventurous, but also cultivate that academic pursuit that I'm sure is in her future? So again, accepting them for who they are, who they're going to love, who they're going to be, is so important for their own self-worth. Because if we start to accept them for who they are, they're going to start accepting themselves and recognizing the gifts and talents that they have as greatness that they just need to perfect and get stronger at, rather than, being somebody that they think everybody else thinks they should be. Because I've tried doing that for myself and it never worked. And I'm sure all of us have been in those situations where we try to be somebody and it just kind of fails. Last step is then to find a community and belong. And I stress the belong to a community, not just be a part of or pop into from time to time, but really sink your teeth into that community and belong to it. Families count, right? Those are a community. but we need another community. I've got my dad nights that I schedule every so often to kind of vent and unwind. But in the communities I belong to, I look for three things, but really four because of the kind of person I am. I look for people that are going to support me, dads who will support me, that will hold me accountable to my expectations and the promises I've made as being a dad, allow me space to be vulnerable, especially when I'm like testing out a new theory on how to raise my kids right, you know. But then how am I also working towards equity, and how are they helping me in fighting towards that equity as well? The images here are of our dad chats that we did throughout the pandemic. These were monthly meetings for members in our Facebook group and others to step in and say, like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with this week, or hey, this is a topic that I need more information about. Who can help me? We had grandpas, we had uncles, we had big brothers coming to these dad chats, and all of them were kind of struggling through different aspects of helping raise children. But those granddads who had many more years of experience would share with the younger dads, here's a time or two that this worked for me, maybe it'll work for you, right? And we started learning together and mentoring one another through this community so that we were growing together, because it's not easy being a connected dad, right? All the things I shared with you thus far are not easy. Being on, right? If you're an introvert and you love quiet time and you've got a crazy extroverted child, they're going to suck a lot of energy out of you. I used to be far more extroverted, but with two kids that love to tell me everything, that takes a lot of my energy, right? And so how do I improve myself? How do I improve the relationship I have with my children? Well, I go to my dad's and I vent sometimes. I praise my kids sometimes, but I have that boundary. I have that community to go to. And through fathering together, as you know, Daniel and David were speaking to in the beginning, we really focus on community as the first step. How do we get people into community? How do we get them to talk to one another so they can start building those skills to be engaged with their children and ultimately becoming positive change agents in themselves first, but ultimately for their family and community? And so we do that in three separate ways. And we have our in-person city dads that are city dads groups. This is an organization that predates Fathering Together, but we've merged recently. And for over 15 years across 40 cities now, they have playdate groups, they've got sporting events, they go to movies, they also do dad nights, you know, Bible studies, what have you, to help dads be more active and engaged and to lean on their friends when they may be at their wits' end for how to be a good dad that day. We've also started shifting or adding, I should say, school-based programs focused on the elementary school level. And so we have dads stepping up and joining PTAs, PTOs, school parenting councils, working with an administration to say, hey, we want dads to be involved in these schools too. We want to be chaperones. We want to make a monthly or maybe once a semester pancake breakfast for everybody. We want to do STEM projects with our kids at the school grounds. Recently, at a school nearby that we're working with in my area of Evanston, Illinois, we had dads get together and have a paper airplane competition to see who could throw the longest airplane. And of course, one dad stepped up, balled up the paper, and just threw it like a baseball and beat everybody out. And of course, all the kids got angry, and so they started making baseballs out of paper and throwing them. And it was a grand old time. Kids had a lot of fun just being present with their dads and building those relationships and connections through these fun games. And so dads start to realize, oh, I can be engaged, right? I don't have to just be quote unquote a breadwinner. But also the schools get to recognize that maybe we can lean on dads, right? Many schools, many institutions default to moms. We can start to default to dad as a primary caregiver, as the go-to parent when needed. And when we do this, when we start to change our mindsets and the institution's mindsets, we can then do the third part of what we are striving for at Fathering Together. How do we expand the narrative? So we have a podcast, we have blogs, we have social media posts and things like that to highlight different forms of fatherhood. But when I was, interviewing my dad for my book and some of his friends who helped raise me as well, all of them talked about kind of this prescribed idea in the early 80s and late 70s that they had to rely on their partners to be the homemaker, to raise the kids while they earned the wages and brought home the money for the family. And my dad didn't want that for himself. He didn't want that. And his friends didn't want that either. And so I was very lucky to have a dad in the early 80s who kind of started to change that narrative for me and other people to change that narrative to set a new standard for me as I became a dad. But those standards still exist in many spaces. And so how do we continue to push that envelope? give new opportunities, new skills for dads to lean on. And when we do that, we can start thinking more creatively how to really be connected, but also have a family dynamic that fits. Because when I met my wife, she was a physical therapist. She made a lot more money than me. She owned a house. I was kind of this, like low income social services kind of person, minister for university. I didn't own much property, anything. Most of what I owned could fit in my car. So, she never met her dream of marrying up, but I surely did. And if she had wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, we would have really had to think critically about our finances, because we wouldn't have been able to live off just my income. I would have had to change a career or change something, but that wasn't who I was. And we wanted to be true to who each other really saw and who we married. And so by having a more broad definition of fatherhood and of motherhood, we could really tackle that family we wanted to. And so I want to leave you with two things. First, the question: what will your legacy be? These are all images of dads that we work with, and all of them have different relationships with their children and different roles they play. And they all ask this question of themselves all the time, but they also ask it in a slightly different way. So I'll give you another way to ask this. So instead of asking your legacy, because that can sometimes maybe feel daunting, instead flip it around and ask, when your children graduate from high school, when they grow up to be adults, what is one thing that they are going to tell their friends about you? When they go off to college, they start their jobs, whatever, how are they going to describe their dad to their peers? Because that's the legacy question too, right? And then the other piece is, because we are in a university setting, I figured I'd give you a little bit of homework, but it's really life work, right? Because I want you to think back on the steps I gave you, the aspects of connected dad life that I've given you, and pick one or two that you want to work on. So set a goal for yourself, right? Like, I want to learn how to be more emotionally courageous. And then think through, what are some action steps I can do? Sure, you can buy my book, fine, great, awesome. But how can you work on that internal work? How can you get a therapist like I've gotten before? How can you find a community to lean on? Because that accountability group, I want you to think of as like a board of trustees for yourself, right? The university has a board, nonprofits have boards, banks have boards of trustees, all those major institutions have these boards that help guide and hold the institution accountable to their mission and their values. So do you have 3 or 5 friends that you can lean on? Maybe it's a boss or a mentor, a good friend, a neighbor that you can check in monthly or weekly or however often you want, and just to say, hey, here's my goal and here's how I'm going to get there. And I'm going to check in once a month for you to help me get there as well. Because when we have these communities to hold us accountable, the burden is not so overwhelming. And that's why I love the rope team structure that y'all have, because those are ready-made systems for you to lean on at Excelsior as well. Last thing I'll say, and this is not to negate everything I said, but I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of work to think through what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be as a dad. But as I work with people, as I connect with other people, I start to realize that the best manual for my children, for me, the best manual for being a dad, is the one that I co-create with each child. As I mentioned, my first child is very different from my second one. So the manual looks very different. The communication skills I have with both of them are very different. I don't talk to my 10-year-old the same way I talk to my 7.5-year-old, right? So I have to co-create those each and every day. So how will you create your manual? How will you use these steps to the best of your abilities? Read up as much as you can, and then apply what works, because it's not all going to work any given day. And if all else fails, please stay in touch. Gordon James is our executive director right now. He's an amazing dad in the Boston area. He does a lot of work with parents who are adopting children, because he's a product of adoption himself. He's overseeing our curriculum design and school-based programs. But also reach out to me. I'm happy to connect. I do a lot of coaching and spiritual direction with folks around who they want to be as dads. So don't hesitate if you have questions to ask them now, but also we'll make sure to send out this PowerPoint presentation so you have our contact information as well. So I will pause there. I hope I was within the time, and we'll dive into the Q&A if that works.
Brian, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and your work with us. I'm gonna read some highlights of what I captured that really struck me. And I gotta say, since the day I adopted my no longer little one, because she's growing like a tree, it redefined me, right? It became part of my core. with all the joys and challenges that that brings. But I loved thinking whether we're a bricklayer or a cathedral builder. And do I see my child, my daughter, as a cathedral? I love the concept of failing as learning about our skills. That's really cool. Communicate at your kids' level about what matters to them, which is easier said than done. You know, I try, but that's a very important part of the relationship. Share your emotions, be authentic with your children. And you had in one of your slides, I really like fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. I thought that was really insightful as well. Accept your kids for who they are and not for who we want them to be. And belong to our community for support, accountability, vulnerability, and equity. And probably the question that hit me the most direct was, how do you want your child to describe you when they grow up? That's a very interesting question, right? To think about as we interact with them and building our manual in co-creation with our child. I see a couple of questions already in the chat. So Pam, would you like to get us started with the questions for Brian?
Sure, that was wonderful, Brian. Your children are very lucky to have you as a dad. So the first question comes from an anonymous attendee, and they ask, a lot of people grew up with abusive dads. Is it better to have grown up with an abusive dad than to have grown up without a dad at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very tough question, and I will do my best to answer it. But without the details of the abuse and what's going on, I would venture to say no. Any sort of abuse is not acceptable. And you know, as someone who was raised Catholic in a Christian tradition, you know, obviously forgiveness and giving folks the option for redemption is always something I want to make sure to give people. But if there's, you know, a tradition of abuse, if there's repeated behavior, then that's going to do a lot more damage than it is good. And I think more importantly, it would be to not have a biological father, perhaps, but to find like other opportunities for fatherhood engagement and mentorship and guidance for the children in that person's life. I'm not a therapist by training. Spiritual direction is what I do, which is similar, but definitely not therapy. And I've talked with many people in therapy sessions about, you know, their conversations with their therapist is all about the abuse of their parents, and sometimes that abuse is just the emotional disconnection, right? It's not like traumatic, like violent abuse. It's just the fact that their parents were not physically present most of the time, or they were working so hard. And I think that's the piece that I talk with a lot of dads who have this mindset of, I need to financially provide, so I'm going to work 88 hours a week so that my kids have a stable home. And while financial stability is very critical to childhood development, so is having a present dad. And for all of the stereotypes of a deadbeat dad as you know, a Black man and a wife beater, or a person of color being absent, I find that far more people that I engage with are experiencing absentee dads of the three-piece suit variety, where a dad is working so hard to be outside the home, to focus on their professional identity, that they are not being present to the needs of their children and building that relationship, which is far more critical. And so if the abuse is causing a disruption of the relationship so that a child is not able to form healthy attachments to the people that are supposed to love them, then yeah, we need to get the child out of that situation and find a much healthier situation for them. The last thing I'll say is, nope, it just left me. I'm so sorry. I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry. If it comes back to me, we'll circle back, because I know there's other questions.
Okay.
But thank you for that question. And you know, whoever did ask that anonymously, happy to talk more with you to find you resources or other support. Yeah.
Another question. I'm not a dad, but a mom of 2 adult men. How can I help their dad, my spouse, to better connect at this stage in their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually am working with a couple of dads who have adult children. The dads themselves are in their 60s, so their kids are in their 30s, and they're struggling with kind of, recognizing that their mortality is approaching, that they've lived more of their life than they have left to live, and they want to make sure that their children are stable and ready to be without their dad. And so I was joking with one of them that I was going to weave some of his comments and thoughts into this presentation if I could. So this is a great question. And I think two things that need to happen. One is the dad needs to want that themselves, right? I've had many moms come to me and say, I need my husband to do this, or I want my this dad or my brother or whoever the dad figure is to do these things. And I often tell them, like, that's great, but I don't want to be the, like, do this or else I'm sending Brian, right? Like that's the the age old, like, well, if when your father comes home, you're really going to get it, right? Like I don't want that relationship to be colored by that sort of way. And so instead, it's really impressing upon the father figures in your life, the dad to your children, your brother, your whomever, to recognize the benefits that come with connecting with children, no matter the age, right? And obviously my dad and I are more friends than I look to him to be a dad, but there have been plenty of moments where I've still called him up and said, hey, my kid's doing this. What did you do when I did that, right? And I even shared a story in the book when I was preparing to write the book. I was talking with him and I said, Dad, what did you think I would be when I grow up? And he just laughed and said, well, I knew a lot of things you weren't going to be. And I was like, what does that mean? And he wouldn't answer me. So I think now, though, it's to recognize that the needs of our children change over time. I'm really good at talking about kids who are in the single digit years because that's where my kids are at. And the developmental strategies I need right now are going to change and evolve as they enter the tween years and into high school. And so I think for the person that asked this, it's to really talk with their dad and ask them what they want out of a relationship with their children, and what do they see as the benefit of guiding their adult sons into fatherhood, and recognizing again the strength that comes from emotional connection, and the benefits that come from emotional connection far outweigh just the cold kind of more analytical advice that you might be able to give. And my dad is a carpenter, and so most of my questions now are around handyman repairs to the house. And when he shows up, his love language is to do repairs whenever he visits me. So I always have a list of things that need to be repaired, and that's how he shows his love. But that always comes with a conversation at the end, and a conversation that is based not just on teach me how you fixed this, but deeper level stuff around what he's feeling about his life, how I'm doing and dealing with the stresses of adulthood, and balancing the work of my day job with, attending the school production that is right after school, which means I have to commute back and leave work early or something, right? And I think the last piece that I'll say that I didn't necessarily weave into the keynote, though, is many dads that have this idea that we only get three emotions, or this messaging that we need to be professionally strong and capable and not necessarily in the home. We need to meet dads where they're at who have that message. And so oftentimes I talk about translating our professional identity into the home, much like moms are taught to how do you translate your mom skills. When you become a mom, you take time off and then you have to rebuild your career afterwards, right? There's this mantra we hear, especially during the pandemic, when we saw so many moms leave the workforce to care for their families during the pandemic. And the challenge is the opposite for dads, right? I go to professional conferences. I learn how to lead great teams at work. I'm a great product manager that can take an idea from a training meeting or a workshop and now apply it to a product out on the shelf that people buy. But those same methods, right? Like I'm not necessarily going to use Asana or some Trello board to run my family, but those steps that we use to run a team, to communicate, emotionally lead, all of those skills we hear about in the workplace can translate into the home, right? Like I can apply my professional skills to get my kids up on time, get them dress fed, brush their teeth, all of those things ready for school. much like I would to get an event planned or a product ready, a presentation to do, right? And so how do we redefine the relationships we think we have, not to see our children as employees by any means, but to see them as part of our team and as part of a community that we serve, like we would serve our colleagues in a workplace, so that we can all thrive. And I think that's a lot of what is at the core of the disconnect, and a lot of it at the core of the violence that we see in dads who are struggling because they didn't learn a skill when they needed to. But it's never too late, right? We have the ability to learn. We can help dads who might act out and be abusive in their vocal language or even in their physical abuse. We can find them pathways. We can get them into anger management programs. We can get them into new ways of viewing their family so that they are no longer abusive. But also, we can help them grow and adapt so that as their sons become dads, we're breaking that cycle of disconnection and instead giving new pathways for living a relational, connected life. That was a very long answer, but sorry, sometimes I get on a roll.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question as people think of other questions or comments that they might have. So please do. But Brian, one of a couple of the challenges that I myself have experienced, and in conversations I've had with many other parents, I heard them say this. One you already alluded to, which is work-life balance.
Yeah.
Right? And how to do that, because depending on your role and depending on the challenges of your work context, right? Sometimes it's very difficult to find time.
Yeah.
Or even on the skills that you have, right? To how time consuming your ability to perform what you need to do is. So maybe some perspective on what you tell, because I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you tell parents? The other one is, there's so much happening right now in the world, close to us, in our community, in our country, in the world, that is just so difficult not only to absorb, to process, but to help our kids know and process themselves. So also any insight that you have in that regard.
Yeah. I'll answer them backwards. So when it comes to like the big issues of the world, two things. One, sometimes when our kids ask us a question, we bring to it master's level thinking, right? Or PhD level, like I'm going to give a dissertation because of this simple question of where do babies come from, or why is the sky blue? But really, kids are just looking for a simple response, right? And half the time they'll move on as soon as you ask it. And so be prepared to give age appropriate discussions, but also recognize that they hear everything and they pick up on everything. And so in the book, I describe, driving across town with my daughter, and the radio, came on, and it was the summer when George Floyd was killed, and there was all of these protests going on. So she heard, this kind of update on the news on the radio, and she was like, "Dad, tell me about this," right? And I started talking about freedom of speech and the Constitution. And I don't know why I went there. I just started going on this kind of like very big response. And she was like, "Well, but I just want to know, like, her best friend who's Black and lived across the street was like, I just want to know if AJ is going to be murdered." And that took a completely different track in the conversation. And I was like, what am I doing? Right? Like, here I am doing this professorial rant when all she wants to know is her friend going to be okay because her friend looks exactly like George Floyd's dad, right? And so, like, how do we really respond to the question they're asking? By asking follow-up, by framing our responses in ways that they will understand, but also not bringing in things that are going to overwhelm them, right? Like, we're not meant to know everything that's in the world, and we don't want to drive our kids to anxiety any sooner than they will. And so really, really simplifying things. things. But I will also say, my daughter's 10. There's a program called CNN 10 that's a 10-minute video on YouTube every day that they watch in school, and it just kind of simplifies news and does a quick soundbite for kids to see kind of like what are some of the big topics. And she loves that. It's consumable for her, and it's been a great resource for us to break open some of that at dinner. So I will leave you with that resource, CNN 10. With the work-life balance piece. So I kind of got alluded to this with our school program. So there's two sides to this, right? There's the individual, like how do we create work-life balance for ourselves? And then there's the institutions that impose upon us the structure of the 40-hour work week, of the blue collar versus white collar jobs, the jobs that have the flexibility to be remote and those that can't, right? And so there's a lot of additional institutional layers to this conversation. So I won't touch those for sake of time. I'll just focus in on you as the individual. And a couple things that I do is, especially when I worked in higher ed as a chaplain, I didn't think of work-life balance on a daily or weekly level, because the semester, there's busy times, there's not so busy times. And so I would work with my supervisor, but now also with my staff, I also work with my staff to say, let's be flexible, right? Like there are times where we just have to get to buckle down and get a report done or something submitted. Like those are going to happen. There are events, hard stops in our day that we need to be present. And then there's those moments where we can have some flexibility, right? And so as a student, you need to ask yourself, right? Like, is there flexibility with the professor on a deadline? If it's due on Friday, are they going to look at it that weekend, or are they going to wait till Monday? Can you turn in Monday morning? As an employer, how do you set the stage in the work culture that you're a part of to say, hey, we have a hard stop, but if you've got, after school programs, if part of your identity is being a little league coach, be proactive and talk with me about it, right? How do you role model that as a team leader, as an employer? So that you create some of that expectation and kind of open up that dialogue more proactively. But also as an individual, how do you find the time to think in your day for 5 minutes about the tasks at home, right? I know my wife is constantly thinking about our daughters no matter what. And at first I just got sucked into work mode because that's what I was used to. But now I've learned throughout the day, I do little mini checks, right? I check on my cell phone to make sure that my daughter, who has a smartwatch and can communicate with me now, is there a crisis that she's facing that she's texted me about? Is there something I can address now, or should I just be prepared to talk about it when I get home? And so having kind of a split-minded time at times of how can I be present and ready when I get home? How can I use my commute? How can I use the downtime to transition? Even if that downtime is just walking up the stairs from your basement to your kitchen because you worked from home that day, or it's a 40-minute car ride or a train ride, finding those breaks in your day to find that balance. And there are some really great programs out there. I mean, obviously Fathering Together, we've got groups that can help you with that, but Third Path Institute is a phenomenal organization out of Philadelphia. And then Mindful Return is out of DC. Lori Mihilich Lewin is a former lawyer who has been working with ERGs around working parents. And so happy to make an intro for a future talk for you all as well, because she's great. I love her, but she has a lot of like, how do you return to work after being home? How do you instill some daily practices in your morning? For her, it's over a cup of coffee or when she's showering. She just does these mantras to kind of level set for her day. And so while there are some institutional frameworks that will infringe on our ability to have work-life balance, there are things throughout the day that we can kind of make ourselves more mindful and kind of find these small moments for meditation.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Brian.
Brian. We have a couple more questions.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I have two more that I really want to get to. I'm a dad, granddad, and great granddad. I know I need to improve to be more like you described. At 77 years old, how do I get started? John.
Yeah. Well, first, start today. It's never too late to start. I would say the first question is really like, go back to that homework assignment and think through what are the goals you want to accomplish and how do you want to get there? And based on, the relationships you have, are there mending you need to do, or is there more proactive stuff that you can step in and start to repair some of the work that is maybe happened with your children or grandchildren, and then starting fresh with those great grandchildren. If you don't know Dr. Becky Dr. Becky Kennedy and her work, The Good Inside. I highly recommend you watch her Instagram feed. She has great tips around emotional connection and all of that. But she, like many others and myself, like the most critical thing you could do as a parent is say you're sorry and repair anytime you've ruptured, right? The repair work is where the growth and the connection happens. Because if you yell and scream and send your child to the corner, then you're breaking that relationship. But if you go to them and say, I'm sorry, I'm actually going to go in the corner because I lost my cool, right? Like daddy needs the timeout, not you. You're just being a 3-year-old. You're just being a 6-year-old, what have you. I'm the one that shouldn't have yelled. Then you're showing them that, again, you're not perfect, but that you're approachable and that you're willing to learn with them. And so repair can take a long time depending on how much rupture has happened, but the more you can start repairing immediately and calling attention to that is critical. And always ending with I love you. Every time my children get in trouble, I always say, I love you, but here's what happened that made me mad or upset, or here's what you did that was against our rules, right? And help them come to a solution with you. So happy to talk more though, John, if there's more depth to that conversation. Please reach out. And the next one looks pretty
One
long.
more.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. One more. I
Let
was
me try and read
adopted
it,
and
yeah.
raised by a single mother, so I appreciate the insight. My question is, I have 2 sons, 1 and almost 4. I have a good job with a lot of potential, but I stopped my graduate school program to be home more. I was gone 60 to 70 hours per week while working and going to school. Now I'm usually only gone 40 hours a week, but I want to complete grad school. My wife and I decided it may be better to complete school once my son begins their school. But that may delay my ability to get to a position that would be a stable job that would provide better work-life balance. Would it be better to wait to finish grad school or sacrifice now so I could potentially get a better position? Thanks.
So critical of that sentence or that question is the word sacrifice. I had many dads I interviewed that would talk about sacrificing their career for the sake of being a parent or a child, raising their children. And I worked with them to reframe, right? Like, are you really sacrificing? Like, what is the sacrifice? Is it the income? Is it the prestige? So ask yourself, right? Like, what does the job give you? And if that job gives you the opportunity for a better life with your children, then definitely jump in and go for it. If there's ways, like I actually started grad school a second time because I'm crazy and 1 master's wasn't enough. I found out I was going to have my first child when I was going back to grad school. And thankfully there was a way to do night school and do it online so that I wasn't needing to be as gone, right? And thankfully I'm someone who's crazy and doesn't need as much sleep, even though I should get sleep. So I would start being a parent, in the afternoons after work and whatnot. And then I would shift when they went to bed into school mode. But that also allowed my wife to go to bed early. So if something came up in the middle of the night with our newborn, I could take action and let my wife keep sleeping. So I think that's a conversation you definitely need to keep having with your partner around this. And obviously with a 1 and 4-year-old, they're not going to have deep insights per se, but check in with your kids, right? Like they want their dad to be happy. They want to be happy with you. As long as you're not sacrificing quality time with them in their day, on their weekends, if they're getting involved in sports, if you can still make those commitments and advance your career, that go for it. But again, I think it's not a question of sacrifice as much as what's the benefit by putting priority on your education and your advancement versus the relationship you have the opportunity to build. And again, happy to meet with any of the folks that ask questions to dive deeper, because I'm sure there's more nuance that we can dig into that. But that's my short answer now, because I realize we're getting close to time. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. So am I getting this correctly, Brian, that you would be willing for us to share your email address if people have questions about which they would like to follow up?
100%, yes. And especially for that last question with the adoption angle, like Corden would be a great resource as well, because he has 3 children, 1 that lives with him now, and he has worked with many parents through the adoption cycle just to help build those relationships and connections. So if I'm not available, or if you have a question that would be better served by somebody else in our community, I want to make sure you get that right answer. And so I know lots of dads and definitely can help find the right mentor for folks who are looking for it. So yeah, please share away. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. And we're out of time, but it was such a fantastic keynote. Thank you for engaging in the dialogue. David, Pam, everyone here who joined us, thank you so much for your time. And let's keep the conversation going. This doesn't stop because the keynote ends. So thank you so much for your investment. And we're hoping to see you next time.